So, as I've been preparing for this message, I've been thinking about a few things that I've struggled with and that I've seen a lot of people struggle with in church. I think sometimes we hear these amazing stories of people who go out and do mission. Pastor Terry or Jane, they tell us about these stories, and we think that it's a little bit unattainable for ourselves. Oh, those people are good at that. One thing we forget is that the stories often come from a lifetime of experience. It's not necessarily every day. But in saying that, I think we could be more involved in mission and more, having conversations every week if we were open to the opportunities available to us. But also, sometimes we think that some people have a certain gifting and we don't have that, therefore we're useless, or we don't have a place within the church. So if you're feeling that way, this message is for you, so that you can see that we need every single person in the body. We need people to pass around the cups and the bread for ushering. We need people in the kitchen. We need people who just love to do baking, all that kind of stuff as well. And we're all part of the mission together. But not just that, we actually can learn to do some of those things like Jane has been doing. If you ask her about how she was, 40 or 50 years ago, I think you would have been surprised at where you've got to now, being able to go and reach people like that. So, and also, I think sometimes we hear a whole lot of things that we should be doing, and we feel that pressure that Jane was talking about. But it's for freedom that Christ has set us free. And all he wants is for us to come to understand who we are in him, who he's created for us to be, and the excitement and joy that can come from us being ourselves, truly ourselves, walking with God. That's what we want to see. Not to pile a whole lot of burdens on people, but for us to all be walking in the plans and purposes that God has for us. So as Pastor Terry said, we are today wrapping up a 5-part series on vision. And at the start of the year, Pastor Terry shared for 3 weeks about how to get a personal vision, how we can figure out where we're going this year in God. And then last week, I began talking about our corporate vision, our communal vision, the vision we have together as a church community. And last week, we looked at 4 challenges to Christians today and how we can navigate through those and what a church would look like in response to that. Now, it's worth remembering that our communal vision, it affects our personal vision. So if we want to buy into and believe in that communal vision that we have, our personal vision has to work in with that as well. So if we're part of the body that God has plans for, then for that vision to come to pass, each member of the body needs to buy into that vision and have it inform their own plans for the year as well. So last week we looked at 4 challenges to the church today. Firstly, we talked about how we live in a world of information. It's everywhere, it's increasing rapidly, and most of it is actually quite irrelevant to our lives, but it still throws itself in our faces every day anyway. And secondly, we live in a world of pluralism. What that means is that there's a multitude of ideas out there because of globalism and lots of different ideas all coming at us. There's a plural, a range of ideas, more than one, and so therefore we sometimes feel immobilized and we don't know what to believe. And thirdly, we live in an age of disconnection, where people no longer have the connection with others that they used to have. We don't have these communities where there might be a little chapel in the middle, we've got a butcher, a baker, and a candlestick maker, and we all live in this community and we all know each other and we all talk about each other, kind of like you get in places like Taihape, where one of my friends is from, and everybody knows him. He was that rascal when he was 18 who did burnouts on people's paddocks, but now he's the guy who builds houses, and 10 years later he's matured a bit and everybody knows him. And it sounds scary to be known like that, but it's also this awesome thing, and so many of us don't have that. And therefore in our isolation, fourthly, we live in a world of need where people just feel trapped, people feel lost. There's issues going on and we don't know how to get help. But God has revealed himself to us, and the Bible has never failed. We have the answer. And I think sometimes we feel a little bit lost and we feel a little bit unsure about that. We talked last week about how God has plans and purposes for us as the church. And in an age of disconnection and need, we seek to be led by God, to grow and to heal in him, and to be able to lead other people to him as well. That's our job, is to lead people to God. not to do it all ourselves, but to be part of that process. And we also quickly went through the book of Ephesians, which we had been looking at last year, and a few of the key verses to church and church planting. And we talked briefly about how the church should look, and today we're going to discuss how we're going to get there. And we're going to talk about 5 main relationships that we have in our lives, and how to give them each the attention that they deserve in order to grow as disciples in mission together. And these 5 areas that I'm about to talk about, think of them kind of like concentric circles. So you've got the small circle in the middle all the way out. And the circles represent how intimate that space is. So the relationship you have with God in the very middle. You can't have a closer relationship with anybody else. And then the relationship on the outside is the relationship you have on a kind of a surface level. Hey, how are you? And then you don't really answer how you are because you don't want to get that intimate with people. So first slide says time with God, time with a mentor or close Christian friends, or your spouse or whatever it is. Time with small group community, time with our social community, and time with our church community. So those are the 5 points that we're going to be talking about today. Now, from the outset, you may be thinking, that's a lot of time that I don't have. But bear with me, because I think you'll be pleased to find that this church model we're talking about today actually requires a little less time than we think. It's about using our time well. And what's more, it will be more effective than any church model that you may have been used to. And so because it will be more effective, we'll be more inspired by it and more motivated by it. And it won't feel like pressure. It'll feel like liberty to us. It'll feel like that abundant life that Jesus was talking about. So you might be thinking, hey, that's too good to be true. But hold on, let's just talk about it. I'm not saying necessarily either that it won't be hard, that there won't be tough times, as Pastor Terry said, or that we can sit back and relax. But it's about being aware of the seasons and the way that God has called each of us to be, and not trying for things that are not what he's wanting to do with us. And so nothing good comes without commitment to the cause. There will be commitment. But when I look around the world, I see lots of people committing to various causes. There's people who have bought into the idea of minimalism. Because we have so many possessions, they run away from that and they cut down all their possessions, they sell everything they've got. Some people living with less than 50 possessions. Just think about it. If you open one of your cutlery drawers at home, you've got at least 50 things there. Get rid of most of them, just keep a spoon and maybe a knife so you can cut a few things. And then you've got vegans living on a diet which excludes animal products, not even things like honey because bees were used to make them. And then you've got people cutting out on plastic use, fast fashion, all of these various causes, and they sound so hard to live by, but people are buying into them and living in those ways. And yet I think sometimes we feel like in the church, we want this easy run, and yet at the same time we're dissatisfied because this mission that we're talking about and this life that we're talking about, we don't attain it either. And there's a story that does the rounds about Ernest Shackleton putting an ad in the local paper when he was looking for crew members ahead of an Antarctic expedition. Men wanted, it read, for hazardous journey, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful, honor and recognition in case of success. And we all crave purpose. We crave something to buy into. Without it, our lives have no real meaning. Have you ever been on holiday for like 6 weeks or out of work and you just desire something to get into? I had that 15 years ago. I thought it would be great. 5 years earlier than that, I was looking forward to not having school and sitting around doing nothing. But then when I actually had that, I just felt so bleh. I needed something to get into. And I even volunteered because I just needed something to be part of. And we've talked before how our society's hedonistic tendencies, that is the pursuit of pleasure, it might seem like something good at the time, but it always fails to satisfy in the end. And then you have people who are disconnected and needy. And people are lost, but we have the answer. A relationship with God and the life abundant that he brings us. But also sometimes people are bored within church. But we do have the greatest cause of all. And I believe sometimes the church sells us short trying to make it easy, rather than helping people connect with the mission that they have and the purposes that they have in God. Last week we talked about how community can't happen without commitment. But here at The Journey, we believe that our mission is a co-mission, the great co-mission. It's a mission that we do together with one another and with God. So before we get started, I'll paint a bit of a picture of what you may be used to in a church environment. And just think, does this resonate with me? Is this what my experience has been? Is this what I'm used to? Often by the time a church gets to a reasonable size, it has a multitude of ministries. There's so many things going on all through the week. And a good Christian could find something to do on almost every day of the week and numerous times during the day as well. There's services on Sunday, often morning and night services, maybe 2 or 3 morning services as well. There might be a worship night during the week and a prayer meeting and small group. So that's all day Sunday and 3 nights a week already gone. Now, if you serve in the youth group or another ministry like that, there's easily 1 or 2, maybe 3 more times in the week gone. And if there's a big church-wide event happening on Saturday, you'll spend the whole week, apart from eating and sleeping and trying to earn a salary as well, and possibly trying to connect with your family and friends and everything, all at church. And it sounds great in theory, but usually it leaves us absolutely shattered and without time for those important relationships in our lives. So you try and find ways to connect those people in your lives who don't know Jesus to church. So you invite them to you think about inviting them to small group or to a service. But to be honest, like I have felt when I was younger, you're not sure that they'd be comfortable coming to either. So you wait for that perfect Sunday service and it never really comes, or you wait for that small group to be the way that you think it will be, to be good enough to invite people, and then it never really happens either. So you think, I'm going to invite them to that event on Saturday. It sounds really cool. We're giving a whole lot of free food. Who's going to say no to free food, right? And then you invite them to that. Half of your friends come, the other half is still not sure, and they have a blast. But it doesn't really go past that. And so for the half that came, the issue is that they came, they saw, they conquered, but they still have no real connection with God or the church. And so does that sound familiar? That's kind of the way that we've been doing church for a while. And occasionally we hear stories of success, but not regularly enough that we feel like it's really pumping and really working. Another issue with church is that the sermons are generally all just about learning, as is small group. We have these Bible studies. And don't get me wrong, they can be interesting and they can be really beneficial for us. And sometimes we feel encouraged, but they very rarely actually change us and transform us. And they hardly ever teach us how to actually live our lives according to our God-given purpose. So the question today is, how can we do church in a way that is transformational, applicational, and not just about information, while allowing ourselves also not to get burnt out, not to just get shattered, yet stay committed, having time to grow as disciples, and at the same time remaining passionate about mission. So that's what we're talking about today. And those 5 areas are what we're going to talk about. Firstly, 5 things that are important that we make room for in our lives. Firstly, time with God. Now, I want you to forget for a moment what you think you know about spending time with God. Some of you will have this down pat. You're really great at building that relationship with God, and others will really struggle with it. I personally have struggled with it for a long time because I hear how some people have that relationship, and I think I need to be just like that. But if you're looking for a template to get you started with spending time with God, Pastor Terry did a couple of sermons in 2018, which are on our website, that you can go to find that template, which is a great place to get started, and from there tweak it and change it so that it works better for you. But remember, it's just a template. Watching the sermon won't build a relationship with God. You actually have to do something about it. And then let God take you on a journey for how He wants to relate to you. And often people ask a well-meaning question: how's your relationship with God going? And sometimes we're like, oh yeah, actually it's going really well at the moment. I've been reading the Bible every day and praying a lot. And sometimes we just kind of try to deflect the question because we haven't read the Bible that day and we feel kind of like a bad Christian. And I know the question is well-intentioned, but a question that I like to ask now instead is, what is God up to in the world around you and in your life? And that's what Pastor Jane was saying before. It's less focused on your own efforts and where you may have felt like you've been failing, and more centered on the partnership that we have with God and the plans that He has for each of us. So Ephesians 2:10, it says, "For we are His workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works." Do you know you're created for good works? And God has prepared them beforehand, that we should walk in them. We don't have to necessarily be inventive and be going around trying to find things to do. We need to be aware of how God is at work in our lives and in the lives of those around us. Notice it doesn't say, if you pray more, God will be with you more. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that we don't need to pray or that we don't need to read the Bible. On the contrary, we learn to have intimacy with God by reading His Word and by spending time with Him. And when we commune with Him through prayer, we grow in that relationship. Intimacy with God is important. And there's a couple of different types of prayer that we can have. That structured prayer in the morning or in the evening or at some point during the day where we intentionally spend time with God. But then there's also that just learning to be aware of Him constantly. And it might not even be talking. It might just be being aware and sensing your spirit to His where He's leading you. And as for the Bible, I'm really glad that I, as a teenager, spent every day getting into that routine to read the Bible, getting it into me. So if you don't know the Bible well, I suggest that you do make it a goal of yours to know it well and to develop that time. And if you are lost, there's plenty of people here who would love to help you and explain how they do it, or point you to tools like Bible apps or books or whatever that can help you in the right direction. But really learn how God wants to communicate with you in the way that He's designed you for. You don't necessarily have to do it the same way as other people, so ask God to lead you. Include Him in His life also. Be aware of His leading and don't neglect His word. So firstly, we need to spend time with God. Secondly, it's important we make room in our lives for intentional time with a mentor, a close friend, or a spouse. And one of the ways we grow, or I personally have noticed this is how my relationship with God works, is talking about God. Asking people where He's at in their lives, and then talking about the things that He's been teaching me. And sometimes as an extrovert, if I try and do that all on my own in the morning or in the evening, it just doesn't quite work. But if I'm catching up with somebody and having a bit of a rant about the things that I've learned, as some of you will be aware of, have experienced, that's when I feel really close to God. So feel free to do that. And one of the ways that we can do that was with a couple of close friends or with a spouse or with a mentor, and really getting into it and talking about where we're at and having them help us, having them feedback, having that space for us to be able to process. Sometimes we expect our small group also to be able to fulfill this role. But because there's often a tension present in small groups between a couple of different things that I'm about to talk about, it's the wrong space for that sometimes. So there's often members in a group who really want to go deep, want to get into spiritual things, and then there's members in the group who they're there to catch up with people. And sometimes there's this tension going on between those. And also sometimes there's people who really want to get into discipleship, and then there's people who really want the small group to be a place of mission where you invite new people in. And there's often tension between those things. So what we're talking about this year is how to build a small group in a way that those tensions are dealt with a little bit better, so that we can do discipleship and mission. And it can be a place of social interaction as well as a place of spiritual growth. And so one of the benefits of a close group of friends, or that time with a spouse, or time in a mentoring relationship, is that you can go deeper than you would in a small group. And you can maintain that relationship for a specific purpose or a time period. And this is where discipleship can have intensity that it wouldn't have otherwise in a small group, and purpose, and where a discerning mentor or skillful friend can help you be transformed, not just receiving information, but actually changed and growing in your relationship with God. As it says in Proverbs 27:17, iron sharpens iron, and one person sharpens another. The key is to meet regularly, whether it's weekly, fortnightly, or once every 3 months, or whatever it is, and to understand why you're meeting, and to periodically reevaluate the purpose of those meetings so it doesn't just become something that you feel obliged to do, but actually is something that's life-bringing to both, or to all parties. And here at The Journey, we want to help you to foster those relationships. You may desire a mentor but not know where to find one or who you should be meeting up with. Or you may want to mentor someone but you don't know how, or you don't feel like you're equipped to be able to do it. Let's begin those conversations and start trying to pair people up. So if you feel like you fit into either of those groups, feel free to sign up afterwards or come and talk to me or one of the pastors. And we'll do our best to be aware of that and try and connect those relationships over the next little period. And we're going to be focusing here on how to equip mentors and mentees to grow as disciples for the purposes that God's called us to. As we look at Ephesians 4:11-12, it says that Jesus gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds or pastors and teachers to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ. That is what the church should be about. So 2 things: time with God, time with a mentor, and thirdly, it's important that we make room in our lives for time with your small group. Over the past 18 months, we've been relatively hands-off with small groups, allowing them to form and to grow relationships, and it's been really important and really great. But this year, we're providing a growth track that we're going to be journeying on together. We're going to be more intentional about where we're going. And we're going to be mentoring leaders so that they'll be effective in helping small groups grow in discipleship and mission at the same time. And as we've already talked about, small groups can often have a tension between intimacy and inclusivity. Some people want to keep it small because it's intimate, some people want to grow it, and there's always this tension going on. But they also struggle with the desire for strengthening relationships versus spiritual growth. You know the typical types of small group members. There are those who love reading the Bible and discussing what they've learned, and then there are those who are there to chat. And I remember a group that we were part of in our mid-20s, and there was this massive tension between the different groups, and each of them was a little bit frustrated with the other because we were at cross purposes. You might recall an ad a few years ago about a family who loved hard-shell tacos. You know, those really westernized tacos. But they tried to get the plate, and then they put these tacos on it, and it falls over. Oh no, why can't we get these tacos standing up so that we can fill them and they don't fall over? It's first world problems, I guess. And then the kid says, why can't we have both? And they go, oh, wonderful. And then they design this taco with a flat base so your taco can stand up. And it was a terrible ad and an awful product. But why can't we have both in church? A small group that plays together stays together. You don't want to just come and read the Bible and do a study and go home and not build relationships with each other. But also a group in which you don't have a point and it's just about relationships. It won't last long. And that group that we were part of, it eventually just disbanded. And some people went over here and some people went over there because we didn't have a point to why we were meeting together either. There has to be a co-mission for us to work towards in order to create community. And I think of those who served in battle in the trenches, and decades after the war was over, they still saw those they fought with as family. And it's the same with mission. We're in the trenches together. We're brothers and sisters in Christ. We are a band of blood brothers and sisters, and we have the greatest task of all in front of us: to reach our friends, families, neighborhoods, and workplaces with the good news that God, the Creator who loves them, wants to guide with them and reconnect with them. So this year we're going to be focusing on helping small groups to grow in relationship with each other, something that we have been doing pretty well for 18 months now, but also to help with discipleship and with living out the Great Commission. Coming up in only 10 days' time, we're launching an apologetics course, which will be aimed at helping Christians to stand firm in our faith, and also teaching us how to share our faith with non-Christians. And we're going to run this for a few weeks together, and then we're going to run a course in our small groups about how to actually develop these missional small groups. We're not just going to tell you to go and do it. We're actually going to show how and work through that together, and then contextualize that so each small group is slightly different from the other, but knows how to do that in a way that all the members of the group feel like they're contributing to the cause. And it's going to be really exciting this term. There's going to be many opportunities for growth and relationship building. So, time with God, time with a mentor, time with your small group. And fourthly, it's important that we make room in our lives for time with our social community. This is where the vision of the journey, so far what we've been talking about sounds pretty standard, what we're used to. But this is where it starts to sound a little bit different from where some of us are used to in church. But it's not entirely new. This is how God has been doing it for thousands of years. For starters, there are plenty of church groups around the world who are starting to move from these big services and big attractional events to actually developing these relational, missional small groups. And then if you go back in history, you'll find that people have always been well connected with their community. So this sort of happened naturally. But today we're going to be talking about how to do it here, where I feel sometimes we don't really connect well with our social community. And as I mentioned earlier, often in the church we're too busy to develop these relationships. And even if we do have them, we find it very difficult to take those friends that we know from outside the church and cross-pollinate them with those friends we know from inside the church. So here is how we want to foster this aspect of the vision here at the Journey. Now, a couple of groups here have already started doing this. So before you start getting skeptical about it, it really does work, and we're starting to see fruit. What we want to do with small groups is focus on two areas: discipleship, that's us growing in our relationship with God, and mission, that's helping others to come into that knowledge of who God is. And often a small group only focuses on discipleship and usually just information with little means of application. But what we want to do is have a little less time committed to traditional small groups. And with that extra time that has come available, focus on building a community where we can invite those outside the church to join in. And this will look differently for different small groups. But I'll use the example we have of the two groups that are already working in this way. Firstly, the Friday morning ladies group. Sometimes when they meet, they focus on growth and they do a study together and they love that. But sometimes maybe once or twice a month, they'll go for a walk along the basin, say, and invite some friends along and end up at a cafe to talk. And that doesn't sound very spiritual, does it? But the conversations that come up can be. And the goal of this time is to connect our non-church friends with our church family. They don't want to come along to a random small group where you're going deep into the book of Isaiah. They want to know that your friends aren't crazy weirdos. So that's what we're doing. And at the right time, we can start to lead people closer to Jesus by building those relationships and being aware of where God is at work in their lives. And we have our 20s and 30s group also, which really loves to hang out. We're of that age where we just love to hang out. Sometimes people will say, I've got nothing on this evening, but I'm going to go to the Indian restaurant or there's this concert or whatever. And we just go to these things and we hang out. And then there's been times where we've intentionally organized events so that we can connect our non-Christian friends with our other friends. And it's been really great. And we try to ask the question when we have an event, is it an OI event? Is it open invite? Is it one of these ones where we're just growing ourselves and our relationships with each other? Or is it one of those events that we're going to invite other people in and they can come and join us? And recently we were invited by Pastor Paul, very generously, to go on his boat to Motuihi Island. And we made it an OI event, and we had a few people who were pushed the boundaries a little bit, and it was a little bit different from what it would have been if it was only Christians, but it was really great. I think, Pastor Paul, you had some good relationship building with them, had some good conversations, and afterwards, I know that some good conversations came out, and they'd softened a little bit toward God, and they'd softened a little bit towards Christians, because we had fun together, right? And another initiative that we ran was the Alpha Course. And traditionally, a person will invite someone to the Alpha Course, and they might be really good friends with them or be neighbors or whatever, but then they invite them to this new environment with a whole lot of new people and a whole lot of conversations and information that they're not used to, talking about Christianity, a world that's just miles from what they're normally used to. And they've got two obstacles to overcome: a whole lot of new people and this thing that they find totally weird. But when we've run these open invite events and built these relationships, it's not such a big jump for people to make because they already know the people they're going to do the course with. And so then they come along and they might find it a bit weird, or they might actually just learn something and say, actually, I resonate with this. And one of the members of our social community has said, yeah, I think this is probably true. It's not where I'm at right now, but I think it's probably true. And we're just going to keep that relationship going. And then at the right time, we'll strike when the iron's hot, and he won't know what hit him. But imagine the harvest if we build all of those relationships, and then at the right time, it's not that big a step to make. And then somebody comes to know God and sees their lives completely transformed. Imagine how exciting it's going to be when that harvest starts coming in. So we're going to talk about this a bit more in depth when we do the missional small groups course and learn how to transform our small groups so that they can run in this way. Fifthly, as we start to wrap up, time with God, time with a mentor, time with your small group, time with a social community, and lastly, it's important that we make room for time with our church community. This is the one that we're probably most used to. We come along once every 3 weeks, maybe 2 weeks on a Sunday, and we come to church, we go, oh man, wasn't that sermon great? Oh, it wasn't as good as last time. Oh man, I really wish Pastor Terry spoke instead of Pastor Anthony, or whatever it is. But time with our church community, it is important. We've looked so far at 4 different types of relationships and groups. And notice that they'll all have elements of either communion with God, communion with each other, or communion with the lost. All churches should have all 3 of these areas in focus. If you forget about God, you just become a secular club. If you forget about relationships with those outside the church, you've ceased to be what you're meant to be. If you forget about your relationships with each other, then you're just running around trying to do stuff, but eventually you'll leave because you'll just feel like you weren't really fulfilled in that anyway. And it's important that we gather as a community. We're better together, and God has great plans for our church community. Ephesians 4:15-16 says that speaking the truth in love, we're to grow up in every way into Him who is the head, into Christ, from whom the whole body, joined and held together by every joint with which it is equipped, when each part is working properly, makes the body grow so that it builds itself up in love. And Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 12:4-7 and 12-14, there are varieties of gifts, but the same Spirit. And there are varieties of service, but the same Lord. And there are varieties of activities, but it is the same God who empowers them all in everyone. To each is given the manifestation of the Spirit, the outworking of the Spirit for the common good. All these are empowered by one and the same Spirit, who gives to each individually as He wills. For just as the body is one and has many members, and all the members of the body, though many, are one body, so it is with Christ. For in one Spirit we were all baptized into one body, Jews or Greeks, slave or free, and all were made to drink of one Spirit. The body does not consist of one member, but of many. We all have a different role to play within the body, and we're all absolutely necessary to the success of the vision and the mission together. And I dream of the day when we can come together on a Sunday and hear testimonies about what God has been doing during the week. When a high percentage of the community is made up of people who have met Jesus recently and had their lives transformed by him, it'll be so exciting coming here. It won't just be, is this true, is this not true? What do I do with all the information I've received during the week? There's a whole lot of other religions and ideas. Where do I stand? I feel disempowered by it all. We'll come and we'll see the testimony of the lives who have been changed. We won't wonder about that. We'll see God is real. He is at work. Jesus is here because this person who I knew and they were struggling in life, now they still have struggles, but they understand and then their life has been completely transformed by the work of God in it. Imagine coming here and we're surrounded by people like that. It's going to be awesome. But here at The Journey, we cannot do it without you. We're here to support you and offer the help that you might need during different seasons. And we're here to encourage you in mission as you are led by God to help others. So it's exciting seeing into the future and celebrating now the things that God has planned for us. And there's so much more that could be said, but this is already the longest sermon that I've preached in the last 18 months. And it's probably the hottest morning. So I don't want to ramble anymore. But I am brimming with excitement about what God is going to do among us. Just this week, a few members of our small group were talking about how they can't wait to see themselves in mission this year. And that was exciting. They're eager to know the plans that God has for them. And we have been gathering and growing well for the last 18 months, looking forward to egg sandwiches and Lydia's awesome baking. And it's been really great. But we have a purpose, and God has work for us to do. There's a mission, a co-mission that we're going to be doing together. It's going to be a great journey, one with purpose, direction, and a harvest.